Good afternoon, grade 9. Am I audible?
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes
Yes
po,
po.
ma'am.
Okay. Is my audio clear? Okay.
Yes po, loud and clear po, ma'am.
So, before we proceed to the discussion, I want to present first the class rules for this session. First, give me your full attention. Opening of other tabs or application is strictly prohibited in this session or discussion. Number two is turn off your microphone unless the teacher asks you to unmute it. And rule number three, open your camera if you have a strong internet connection. And if you don't have strong internet connection, it's fine as long as you're there and you're listening to me and you're participating actively in my discussion. Okay? So last time we discussed a short story entitled Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. So as um, let's have a review first about the story we've discussed. So Emily is a is the main character of this story. So Emily is a um, uh, um, grew up alone with her father, and when she she reached certain age, her father died, and that time when her father died, she doesn't want the body of her father to be buried or to leave their house. So since then, Emily was never seen again outside of her house and roaming around their town. Not until one day when she met Homer Baron. Homer Baron is a construction worker. He he works outside the house of Emily, and since then, Emily fell in love with Homer Baron. That time, people saw Emily outside their house and having a date with Homer Baron. Then one time, Homer Baron um, asked Emily if he can go back to his town, since Homer Baron is not actually living in Emily's town. And um, as we remember, Homer Baron um, said something and confessed something to Emily, that Homer Baron likes men instead of women. So Emily got brokenhearted, and since then, the people thought around the town that Homer Baron went back to his town um, and never came back to Emily's town again. But after few days, 3 days after, so there is smell outside the house of Emily. They thought that it's a dead rat or a dead cat. So um, the, fast forward to the time that Emily died. Emily's family discovered that there is a dead body inside Emily's room, and they found out that that body is Homer's body because of the robe, the brush, and the other things inside the room with the initial HM, which means Homer Baron. So the story is sad because Emily is slowly throughout her life, and she just wants attention, love, and company throughout her life, but no one is willing to give her that kind of affection that she wants. Okay, so now, Laurie Jane, will you read the sentence I presented on? Okay.
Colonel Sartorius invented an involved tale to the effect that Miss Emily's father had loaned money to the town, which the town, as a matter of business, preferred this way of repaying.
Okay. Oh, another sentence that we've got from the text. So this is the next sentence. Erica, will you please read what is presented on the screen?
That was when people had begun to feel really sorry for her.
Okay. So as we can see that these sentences are compound sentences and they have relative clause. The relative clause in the first sentence is which the town as a matter of business, and the other and in the next sentence when people had begun to feel really sorry for her. So later on, we will discover what is the difference between these two sentences. Okay, and later on we will identify and we will define the meaning of defining and non-defining relative clause and the pronouns that we will use to identify which is relative clause in a sentence. Okay, so now the defining relative clauses. Defining relative clauses is a kind of clause that gives information or that makes the sentence make sense that makes the sentence make sense. It is important to what is being discussed in the sentence. Here, the defining relative clause, if we remove this from the sentence, the main clause itself will not stand alone because the relative clause gives meaning to the main clause. If we remove for, for example, the sentence, if we remove when people had begun to feel really sorry for her, the sentence that was is not enough. It cannot stand alone, right? Okay. So for the second one, the non-defining relative clause, in this kind of clause, the information is not essential. That means the main clause makes sense without it. It is unnecessary or extra. For defining clause, if we remove it, the sentence is nonsense. But in non-defining relative clause, if we remove this, the sentence can stand alone on its own, right? So
Yes, ma'am.
for this sentence, the non-defining relative clause here is which the town as a matter of business. Because if we remove this, the sentence can stand alone on its own, right? It is not that necessary. It's just an additional information to the sentence. Okay? Is
Yes po.
everything? Oh, is
Yes,
everything
ma'am.
clear? Um,
Yes po, clear po.
you, you understand? Okay. Now, what is a relative clause or what are relative clauses? Relative clauses add extra information to each sentence by defining a noun or by identifying the person or thing we are talking about. Just like in the sentence, which the town as a matter of business gives extra information to the first sentences that we did that for the first clauses that the sentence have. And another thing about non-defining relative clause before I forgot about this. We can determine that is a non-defining relative clause if we saw a comma. The non-defining relative clause is separated by a comma from the main clause itself. Okay. So again, how do we determine non-defining relative clause? Larry Jane, by the use of the punctuation.
Kama po.
Tama po, ma'am.
Okay, okay. By the use of the punctuation mark, comma. Okay. So, so another thing to identify or discover the relative clause in a sentence is by relative pronouns. Relative pronouns link the main clause with the relative clause. So, example of relative pronouns are which, that, whose, whoever, whomever, who, and who. And in some situations, the words what, when, and with. So these are other examples for this two relative clause. So first one, anyone who's willing to read, okay, read and identify the clause. Okay, Laurie Jane.
Emily was never seen again when his father died.
Okay, what is the relative clause here?
When his father died.
And it is a defining or non-defining relative clause.
Defining relative clause po, ma'am.
Because if we remove when his father died, the sentence Emily was never seen again will not stand alone because it does not make sense at all, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Another example. Erica, read the sentence first.
Homer Baron, who works near Emily's house, went back to his town. I
Okay,
think, ma'am,
what?
the relative clause here is who works near Emily's house,
Okay.
and it is a non-defining relative clause because the sentence can stand alone, and it's only an additional information, and it has a comma po.
Yes, it is separated by a comma. Okay. Next one, Lorgy.
Emily loved the necklace whom her father gave when she was young.
Mm-hmm. So, what is the relative clause here?
The relative clause in the sentence is whom her father, and it is non-defining relative clause because if you remove that clause, it is not necessary, and you will still understand the sentence, woman.
Yes, and it is also separated by a comma. Okay. Next, the next one okay, Erica.
Homer gave Emily a rose which she treasured the most.
Mm-hmm.
The relative clause here is which she treasured the most, and it is a defining.
Okay, it is a defining relative clause because if we remove that, um,
It can't stand
it
alone, ma'am.
cannot stand
It
alone.
needs for
It
the
will be
information
more.
to make sense.
Okay. So assessment. Um, just like the one that we did earlier, I will present sentences. You will read you will read them, and you will identify the relative clause, and you will tell me if it is defining or non-defining clause. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the first sentence. Okay, Nika.
My house, which is in Seoul, is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
S- This sentence is non-defining relative clause, and the relative clause used in the sentence is which is in Seoul.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. Now the next one, Erica.
My brother, who finished university this summer, is spending the year traveling. The
Mm-hmm.
relative clause here is who finished the university this summer, and it is a defining clause because when we remove the clause, it can stand alone because it needs for the sentence to make sense.
Okay. Next one. Okay, Lori Jane.
The house whose the house whose doors are shuttered is rumored to be haunted. The the relative clause in this sentence is whose doors are shuttered, and it is defining relative clause because uh, it is necessary in the sentence po.
Mm-hmm. Right. Next one. Second to the last. Okay, Erica.
The celebrity, who was a major film star, was photographed on the red carpet. The relative clause here is who was a major film star, and this sentence is a non-defining clause because it has a comma. It is separated by comma, and if we remove the relative clause, who was a major film star, it can stand alone.
Okay. So last one for the last sentence. Okay, Lori Jane.
The private yacht, which was rumored to be the most expensive in the world, belonged to the mysterious couple. Uh, the the def- the defining the relative clause in this sentence is which was rumored to be the most expensive in the world, and it is non-defining relative clause because if you remove this clause, it is not necessary and the sentence can stand alone.
Okay, so that's the end of my discussion. Thank you for joining today's class. So I will upload the quiz the quizzes in your Google Classroom, and the submission of your quiz will be on Monday 6 p.m. So that's the end of the discussion. I hope you've learned a lot and you've listened really well. So that's all. Goodbye, class.
Goodbye,
Goodbye
ma'am.
and thank you po, ma'am.